Look at this. 10 kilograms of potatoes pulled from a single bucket. Not a field, not a raised bed, not even a real garden. Just a plastic bucket sitting on a concrete patio. And the wild thing is, the bucket did not start with anything special in it. No expensive seed stock, no fertilizer cocktail, no complicated irrigation. Just ordinary dirt, a few sprouted potatoes from the back of the pantry, and one simple trick that almost nobody talks about anymore. If you have ever thought you could not grow your own food because you do not have land, because you rent, because all you have is a balcony or a driveway, then what I am about to show you will change how you see every empty corner of your home. The reason this method is not everywhere is honestly kind of annoying. It works too well and costs too little for anyone to make real money teaching it to you. Think about it. The garden industry wants to sell you raised bed kits for $200, fancy potato towers, special grow bags, soil blends, fertilizer spikes. They want you to believe that growing a simple potato requires a degree in horticulture and a small fortune in equipment. But the people who actually grew food for centuries before all that existed, they knew something we forgot. Andean farmers growing potatoes on steep mountainsides, European peasants with tiny cottage plots, even prisoners of war during the last century who grew food in whatever containers they could find. They all understood the same principle. A potato plant does not care where it lives. It does not care if its home is a terraced mountainside in Peru or a plastic bucket on a Brooklyn fire escape. It only cares about how much loose soil it has above its roots and how much moisture stays consistent. That is the whole idea. Everything else is decoration. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Probably just another miracle internet trick that does not actually work at all. I completely understand your skepticism. I thought exactly the same thing until I saw with my own eyes what a 5-gallon bucket can do. And hand on heart, I have been growing food for a good 15 years now, and I have made every mistake there is to make. I have killed more plants than most people will ever own. I have overwatered, underwatered, overfed, underfed, and ignored more vegetables than I care to admit. So when I tell you this works, I am not repeating something I read on a forum. I am telling you what I have done myself, on a patch of concrete behind my garage, with 0 garden beds and 0 excuses. Do you know that feeling when you want to grow something, but every time you think about it, you hit the same wall? No space, no time, no money for all the equipment. Maybe you live in an apartment with a tiny balcony that gets sun for only a few hours. Maybe you have a yard, but the soil is terrible, full of clay or rocks or worse, and the thought of double digging makes your back hurt just thinking about it. Or maybe you are renting, and the landlord will not let you tear up the lawn, and every spring you watch other people planting and harvesting, and you think, well, that is just not for me. Not yet. Maybe someday, when I have a real house with a real garden. I know that feeling. I lived in that feeling for years. I would walk through garden centers and feel this strange mixture of longing and resentment, picking up seed packets and putting them back, convincing myself that I had nowhere to put them. And the thing that gets me every time is how unnecessary it all was. Because the solution was sitting in my kitchen the whole time, in the form of a potato that had started growing eyes in the back of a cupboard. Before I show you the setup, let me just say what does not work, because I have tried all of it, and I would rather you skip my failures. First, the classic advice. Dig a trench, plant seed potatoes, hill them up as they grow. That works beautifully if you have loose, rich, well-drained soil and plenty of room. But if you have heavy clay, or rocky ground, or no ground at all, it is a recipe for tiny, misshapen, scabby potatoes that are not worth the effort. I once spent an entire weekend digging a potato bed in clay soil, and by the end of it, my hands were blistered and my back was shot. And the harvest that fall was so pathetic that I almost gave up on potatoes entirely. Second, the fancy potato towers you see advertised. The tall wooden boxes where you add boards and soil as the plant grows. The theory sounds great, but in practice, the yield is often disappointing. Potatoes do not actually produce tubers all the way up the stem the way those ads suggest. They mostly produce in one zone, and the tower ends up being a lot of work for a modest harvest. You spend more time building the tower than you spend harvesting the potatoes, and that ratio is backwards. Third, the chemical shortcuts. Synthetic fertilizers that push leafy green growth at the expense of tubers. You end up with a gorgeous plant above ground and almost nothing below. It is like training for a marathon by lifting weights. You look strong, but you cannot run. And then there is the most common mistake of all, which is not trying at all. Waiting for the perfect conditions. Waiting for the right house, the right yard, the right season of life. I have seen so many people do this that it honestly makes me a little sad. They read books, they watch videos, they plan imaginary gardens in their heads, and they never actually plant a single thing. Because the truth is, the perfect time never comes. There is always something in the way, always a reason to wait. But a bucket, a bag of dirt, and a potato that was going to rot anyway, those are available to almost everyone, almost everywhere right now. Now, the person who finally convinced me to try this was not a famous gardener or a YouTube expert. It was an older woman named Mrs. Kowalska, who lived 3 doors down from my first apartment. She had the most incredible balcony garden I had ever seen. Tomatoes, herbs, cucumbers, and yes, potatoes, all growing in containers on a space no bigger than a small table. I would walk past her building on my way to work and just stare up at that balcony, at the green cascade of leaves spilling over the railing, and I could not figure out how she did it. I asked her one day how she did it, expecting some complicated secret. She laughed and said in her thick accent that the secret was that there was no secret. Just buckets, dirt, and patience. She told me that back in her village, nobody had a big field. Everybody grew in whatever they could find. Old buckets, wooden crates, even sacks. And they fed their families that way. She looked at me and said, in the same tone you would use to tell someone the sky is blue, that a potato does not know the difference between a field and a bucket. It only knows if it has room to grow. That sentence stuck with me for years. It rattled around in my head every time I made an excuse for why I could not grow anything. And when I finally tested it myself, she was absolutely right. So here is the reveal. The secret ingredient, the thing that makes this all work, is nothing more than a plastic bucket. A plain, ordinary 5-gallon bucket. The kind that food products get shipped in. The kind that construction workers throw away by the dozen. The kind you can often get for free from a bakery or a deli or a restaurant if you just ask nicely. I have gotten buckets from a local donut shop, from a pickle distributor, from a hardware store that was throwing out containers that had held joint compound. They are everywhere. Or if you have to buy one, they cost about $4 or $5 at any hardware store. That is it. No special potato tower, no grow bag, no self-watering container with 15 parts. Just a bucket. And the reason it works so well is that a bucket gives you the one thing potatoes need more than anything else. Depth, loose, uncompacted soil that the tubers can expand into without fighting rocks or clay or tree roots. A potato plant grown in a bucket, done correctly, will produce a harvest that shocks people who have only ever grown in the ground. Now, before you roll your eyes and click away, let me tell you the part that most people get wrong, the part that took me 2 seasons to figure out. Because yes, you can just throw a potato in a bucket of dirt and get something. But if you want 10 kilograms from a single bucket, which is about 22 pounds, you have to do a few specific things. And the first one is choosing the right potato. Go to your pantry right now, or your grocery store. Look for a potato that has started to sprout. Those little white or purple shoots coming out of the eyes. That is not a potato going bad. That is a potato telling you it is ready to grow. I know it looks a little alien, a little creepy even, those pale tendrils reaching out from the skin like something from a science fiction movie. But that is life. That is the plant waking up and saying, "Put me in the ground." You can use any potato, but the best results come from varieties that are naturally high-yielding. Yukon Gold, Russet, Red Pontiac, Kennebec. If you can find organic potatoes, even better, because conventionally grown potatoes are sometimes treated with a sprout inhibitor that slows growth. But honestly, any potato that sprouts will work. I have grown grocery store potatoes that produced beautifully. The plant does not care about the label. If your potato is large, you can cut it into pieces, each piece with at least 1 or 2 eyes. Let the cut pieces sit out for a day or 2 so the cut surface dries and forms a callus. This prevents rot. If your potato is small, just plant it whole. Do not skip this step. A potato that goes into wet soil with an open cut will often rot before it sprouts, and then you will blame the method when really it was just a matter of patience. I learned this the hard way, with a bucket that smelled like a swamp and produced nothing but fungus gnats. Now for the bucket. 5 gallons is the minimum. 10 gallons is even better, but 5 works. The bucket must have drainage holes. I cannot stress this enough. Potatoes hate sitting in water. They will rot, they will get diseases, they will smell terrible. Drill or cut at least 6 holes in the bottom, each about the size of a pencil. If you do not have a drill, you can heat a screwdriver on a stove and melt holes through the plastic. It smells bad, so do it outside, but it works. I have done this on a balcony with a lighter and an old screwdriver, and my neighbors probably thought I was losing my mind, but the bucket worked perfectly. Do not skip the drainage. This is the single most common reason people fail with bucket potatoes. They think more water is better. It is not. Consistent moisture is the goal, not a swamp. The next part is the soil, and this is where I will save you some money. You do not need a fancy potting mix. You do not need a special potato blend. What you need is a mix that is loose, drains well, and holds some moisture. The simplest recipe is this. About 2/3 ordinary potting soil, the cheapest bag you can find, and about 1/3 compost. If you make your own compost, wonderful. If not, bagged compost is fine. If you want to make it even cheaper, you can mix in some well-rotted leaves or aged manure. The key word is loose. When you squeeze a handful, it should hold together briefly, then crumble. If it forms a hard ball, it is too dense. Add more compost or some perlite or coarse sand. If it falls apart immediately and feels dry, it is too sandy. Add more potting soil. You want the kind of soil that a potato can push through without effort. Imagine trying to dig a tunnel through wet concrete versus digging through loose sand. The potato wants the sand, but with enough structure to hold water. Fill the bucket about 1/3 full with this mix. Place your seed potato pieces on top, eyes facing up. If you have a large bucket, you can put 2 or 3 pieces, but do not overcrowd. For a 5-gallon bucket, 2 pieces is the sweet spot. More than that, and they compete for space and nutrients, and you end up with lots of small potatoes instead of fewer large ones. Cover the seed pieces with about 4 inches of soil. Water lightly, just enough to moisten the soil without making it soggy. Then place the bucket somewhere that gets at least 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. More is better. A south-facing wall, a driveway, a balcony, a rooftop. Anywhere sunny. Here is where the magic happens, and the part that most tutorials never explain properly. As the potato plant grows, it sends up a stem with leaves. But below the soil, it is also sending out stolons, which are horizontal stems that will eventually swell into potatoes. The plant produces tubers along the buried portion of the stem. So the more stem you bury, the more potential potato sites you create. This is why you hill potatoes in a traditional garden. But in a bucket, hilling means adding more soil as the plant grows. When the plant is about 8 inches tall, add more soil mix, burying the lower leaves and leaving only the top few inches exposed. Keep doing this every week or 2 as the plant grows, until the bucket is nearly full, leaving just an inch or 2 of space at the top for watering. Each time you bury more stem, you are creating more room for potatoes to form. This is the entire secret. A bucket lets you hill up to a depth that is almost impossible in the ground, unless you are willing to build a mountain. Do not, and I mean do not, skip the hilling step. I know it seems like extra work. I know it seems like you are burying a perfectly healthy plant. I know there is a little voice in your head that says, leave it alone. It is doing fine. But this is the difference between harvesting 5 small potatoes and harvesting a bucket full. The first year I tried this, I got lazy. I planted the potato in a full bucket of soil and just let it grow. The plant was beautiful, tall, green, lush. And when I dumped the bucket at the end of the season, I found exactly 4 potatoes the size of golf balls. I was furious. I blamed the method. But the problem was not the bucket. The problem was that I had given the plant no reason to produce. It had all the soil it needed from the start, so it just grew leaves and called it a day. The hilling is what forces the plant to keep producing along the buried stem. It is the signal that says, hey, there is more room down here, fill it up. Now watering. This is the part that separates a good harvest from a great one. Potatoes need consistent moisture, especially during the time when tubers are forming. In a bucket, the soil dries out faster than in the ground, so you need to check it regularly. In hot weather, that might mean watering every day. In cooler weather, every 2 or 3 days. The test is simple. Stick your finger into the soil about 2 inches deep. If it feels dry, water. If it feels moist, leave it alone. Do not let the soil dry out completely, and do not keep it waterlogged. Both extremes stress the plant and reduce yield. A stressed potato plant produces small, cracked, or hollow potatoes. A happy potato plant produces the kind of potatoes that make your neighbors ask what you are feeding them. And that brings me to feeding. You do not need much. Potatoes are not heavy feeders compared to something like tomatoes or corn. But they do appreciate a little help, especially in a contained environment where nutrients can wash out with every watering. The simplest approach is to mix a slow-release organic fertilizer into the soil when you plant. Something balanced, like a 5-5-5 or a 10-10-10, or just a good handful of compost. Then, about halfway through the season, when the plants are flowering, give them a light feed with a liquid fertilizer, something higher in potassium to encourage tuber development. If you want to keep it completely free, you can make a simple compost tea by soaking compost in water for a day and using that water on your plants. The point is not to overdo it. Too much nitrogen gives you leaves and no potatoes. Too little nutrition gives you small potatoes. Aim for the middle. The science behind why this works is actually quite beautiful, and once you understand it, you will never look at a potato the same way. A potato plant is a survival machine. Its entire goal in life is to reproduce, and it does that through tubers. The tubers are not roots. They are modified stems, swollen storage organs that the plant fills with starch and nutrients. The plant photosynthesizes with its leaves, converting sunlight into sugars, and then pumps those sugars down into the tubers. The more leaf surface the plant has, the more sugar it can produce. The more buried stem it has, the more places it can store that sugar. And the more consistent the moisture, the more efficiently that sugar can move through the plant. This is why hilling works. This is why a bucket works. A bucket gives you control over all 3 factors: depth, moisture, and nutrition. In the ground, you are at the mercy of your soil. In a bucket, you are the god of a tiny potato universe. The reason this matters so much is that potatoes are one of the most productive food crops per square foot in existence. A single potato plant, given the right conditions, can produce between 2 and 5 kilograms of tubers. In a traditional garden, that plant might take up 3 square feet of space. In a bucket, it takes up about 1 square foot. So if you have a patio that is 10 feet by 10 feet, you could theoretically fit 40 or 50 buckets. Even if each bucket produces only 5 kilograms, which is a conservative estimate, that is over 200 kilograms of potatoes from a space that most people use to store a barbecue and a couple of chairs. And the beauty is that you can start with 1 bucket. Just one. Prove to yourself that it works. And then, next year, when you have seen the harvest with your own eyes, you can scale up as much as you want. Let me walk you through the entire timeline, because I know it helps to see the whole picture before you start. In early spring, as soon as the danger of hard frost has passed, you plant your seed potatoes. Depending on your climate, that could be March, April, or May. The potato plant will emerge within 2 to 3 weeks. Over the next 2 months, you will be hilling every week or 2, adding soil as the plant grows. Around midsummer, the plant will flower. This is a sign that tubers are starting to form below ground. After flowering, the plant will begin to die back. The leaves will yellow, then brown, then collapse. This is not a disease. This is the plant telling you it is done. The tubers have reached maturity, and the plant is putting every last bit of energy into them. Wait about 2 weeks after the foliage dies back completely. This allows the potato skins to thicken, which makes them store better. Then, and this is the best part, you simply dump the bucket. That moment when you tip the bucket over and the soil spills out, and you see the potatoes tumbling out with it. That is one of the most satisfying experiences in all of gardening. It is like buried treasure. You will find yourself digging through the soil with your bare hands, pulling out potato after potato, each one a small miracle. And the yield, if you have done everything right, will genuinely surprise you. I have had single buckets produce over 10 kilograms. Not every bucket, not every year, but it happens more often than you would think. The average, in my experience, is somewhere between 4 and 7 kilograms per bucket. But the first time you break 10, you will understand why I am so passionate about this. Now, a few common problems and how to avoid them. If your potato plant is tall and leggy with small leaves, it is not getting enough sun. Move the bucket to a sunnier spot. If the leaves are yellowing and wilting while the soil is wet, you are overwatering. Let the soil dry out and reduce your watering frequency. If the leaves have holes or are being eaten, you likely have potato beetles. The adult beetles are striped, and the larvae are red and soft. Pick them off by hand and drop them into soapy water. Check the undersides of leaves for orange egg masses and crush them. If you are diligent for a week or two, you will break the cycle. If the leaves develop brown spots and the plant collapses early, it might be blight, a fungal disease. The best prevention is to water the soil, not the leaves, and to space your buckets so there is good air circulation. If blight strikes, harvest immediately and salvage what you can. If you want to grow potatoes without any soil at all, there is another method that some people swear by. You fill the bucket with straw or shredded leaves instead of soil, and you plant the potato in that. As the plant grows, you keep adding more straw. At harvest time, you just pull the plant and the potatoes come out clean, no dirt at all. This method works, but in my experience, the yields are lower than with soil. The straw does not hold moisture as well, and the potatoes do not get as much nutrition. But it is a fun experiment, and if you have a source of free straw, it is worth trying side by side with a soil bucket just to see the difference. That is the kind of thing I love about this hobby. There is always something new to test, and the failures teach you as much as the successes. One more thing that almost nobody tells you about growing potatoes in buckets. The soil you use is not wasted. After you harvest, the soil is still perfectly good for growing other things. Potatoes are not particularly heavy feeders, so the soil will still have plenty of nutrients. You can use it for herbs, for lettuce, for flowers, for almost anything. Or you can refresh it with some compost and use it for potatoes again next year. I have been reusing the same soil for years, just adding a little compost and a little fertilizer each season, and the results have only gotten better. The soil develops a healthy microbial ecosystem over time, and that benefits everything you grow in it. This is not a one-shot deal. It is a system, and that really is the deeper point. This is not just about growing potatoes. It is about reclaiming a skill that was nearly lost. For most of human history, people grew their own food. Not because it was a hobby, but because it was survival. They knew how to read the seasons, how to build soil, how to coax life from a handful of dirt. That knowledge was passed down from parent to child, generation after generation. And then, in the span of a few decades, we outsourced all of it. We forgot how to grow a potato. We forgot that a potato will grow in a bucket on a balcony. We forgot that food does not have to come from a store. And the people who profit from our forgetting, the ones who sell us processed food and garden gadgets, and the idea that growing your own food is too hard, they are perfectly happy to keep it that way. But we are not afraid to experiment. We are not afraid to try something that seems too simple. We are not afraid to look at a plastic bucket and see a garden. Because that is what it is. A garden is not a place. It is a decision. It is the decision to plant something, to care for it, to learn from it, and to harvest the result. And if that garden happens to fit in a 5-gallon bucket, then so be it. The potatoes do not care. They will grow anyway. They have been growing for thousands of years, through wars and famines and the rise and fall of empires. They will grow in your bucket too. So here is what I want you to do. Go to your kitchen. Find a potato that has started to sprout. If you do not have one, buy a bag of organic potatoes and leave them in a dark cupboard for a week or two. Then find a bucket. Any bucket. Ask a restaurant, Check a construction site dumpster, buy one for $5. Drill some holes in the bottom. Fill it a third full with cheap potting soil and compost. Plant your potato. Put it in the sun. Water it. Hill it as it grows. And then in about 3 months, dump it out and count your harvest. I promise you, the first time you do this, you will be hooked. You will start looking at every empty container in your house differently. You will start thinking about what else you can grow. You will start telling your friends, and they will look at you like you are crazy, and then they will try it too, and they will send you pictures of their first harvest, and you will smile because you know exactly how they feel. This is how the knowledge spreads, not through classes or books or expensive courses, through one person showing another person that it works, through a bucket of potatoes on a patio, through a harvest that costs almost nothing and feeds a family, through the simple, stubborn, beautiful act of growing something yourself. Mrs. Kowalska knew this. The Andean farmers knew this. Every gardener who has ever saved seeds and shared cuttings and taught a neighbor how to hill potatoes knew this. And now you know it too. If this video helped you see the potential in a simple bucket, do me a favor. Hit the like button so that more people can find this information. Subscribe if you want to see more experiments like this, more forgotten knowledge pulled out of the past and tested in the present. And share this with someone who thinks they cannot grow their own food because they do not have a garden. Show them what a bucket can do. Because the more people who grow their own food, the less power the people who profit from our dependence have over us. And that, my friend, is a harvest worth planting for. Let me leave you with one final thought. Every spring, millions of people look at their small balconies, their paved yards, their rented rooms, and they think, I wish I could grow something. And every spring, millions of those people do nothing, because they believe the lie that you need land to grow food. But the truth is, you need only 3 things. A container, some soil, and a seed. Everything else is just details. The potato does not ask for a field. It asks for a chance. Give it one. Give yourself one. And then, in a few months, when you are standing over a bucket full of potatoes, when you are holding in your hands food that you grew yourself from nothing but dirt and water and sunlight, you will understand why this knowledge was worth saving. You will understand why I am standing here, talking to a camera, trying to convince you to plant a potato in a bucket. Because it is not really about the potato. It is about remembering what we are capable of. It is about taking back a small piece of our independence. It is about proving, to ourselves and to anyone who doubts us, that we do not need permission to grow. We just need a bucket.